Hello, and welcome to the UIC INC podcast, where episode to episode we interview different working scientists. This episode we have Dr. Nick Syring, and without any further ado, I would like to allow Dr. Syring to introduce himself. Dr. Nick, how are you?
Hi, Blake. Doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Happy to be talking to you. So, can you tell us what is the spelling of your name and what do you do?
Oh, yeah. I'm Nick Syring. Last name is Syring. It's pronounced just like Syring, like you're searing meat in a skillet or something like that. I am a biostatistician. I work at Corteva Agriscience.
Corteva. And what does Corteva Agriscience do?
Corteva Agriscience is one of the largest agricultural companies in the world. We do a couple really big things. So part of the company, about half the company or so, is a seed company. So we produce commercial seed for farmers. So like, if you're in Illinois, I'm over in Iowa. If you're driving through and you see cornfields and soybean fields, probably half or so of that came from Corteva.
Wow.
So right now, Corteva is the market leader in soybean. I think we have about 55% product share of soybean in the United States.
That's insane.
Yeah, there's other big companies in agriscience like Bayer, which was formerly Monsanto. It's been bought by Bayer a few years ago. BASF, UPL, Syngenta, just to name a few.
Sure.
You might see sometimes when you drive past cornfields, you'll see little signs that are the brand names of different seed that the farmers are using. A big one maybe you've seen before is Pioneer, and Pioneer is a Corteva brand. Came from a merger.
Are they? Yep. Are they the symbol that's like the infinity beneath the little plant?
Yeah, very good.
I have a hat from them.
Oh, really? Yep, that's Pioneer, and Pioneer is part of Corteva. Corteva actually came about a few years ago as a big merger between three different agricultural companies: Pioneer and Dow and DuPont, the divisions of Dow and DuPont, which are really chemical companies that were doing crop science, agriscience. And so that's really the other half of the Corteva company, which is crop protection. And crop protection really refers to chemistry, chemicals, things that are sprayed on fields, or also coatings. There are chemical coatings of seeds that work as herbicides, fungicides, pesticides, those sorts of things. So it's really a biochemistry company.
Sure. And could you restate your position and then define it again?
Oh, yeah, sure. So I have a really generic job title, which is research scientist, which I think sounds really cool.
It does. That's why we're talking to you.
But tons of people at my company are actually called research scientists, and we do vastly different things. So I sort of have a sub job title, which is biostatistician. And that's a lot more honest. I am really a statistician, not so much a scientist. I didn't come from a science background. I have a PhD in statistics, and so my knowledge, my expertise is really about statistics, and most of my work is supporting people who you would probably refer to more as scientists or plant scientists and plant breeders.
So what sort of data do you start digging into as a biostatistician to help these folks out?
Right. Yeah. So that kind of goes back to the roughly the two halves of the company, which is on one half the crop protection or sort of more like chemistry business, and the other half being the commercial seed production business. And so I work in the seed part of the business. So
Seed production.
yeah. So really what I'm involved with is the plant breeding or crop breeding part of the company that is continually trying to improve crops that we offer as products in the form of seed. And we do that through field trials. So we have new genetics, new crops on really a seasonal basis that aligns with the seasons of growing crops outside in the fields in different climates around the world, and aligns with the maturities of those plants. And we go out and we do plant crossings. We cross plants, we reproduce plants, and make selections. That's what plant breeders do. They make selections to get the best hybrids or inbred crops that they can, that we measure in various ways. A lot of it has to do with yield, but lots of other traits too. For example, disease resistance. So we have lots and lots of experiments, field experiments, where we're growing huge numbers of crops in fields in various places, and recording a lot of data about how those crops perform, and then assessing what are the best ones and trying to make good selections.
So what would be like a typical sample size for one of these?
Well, it certainly varies by crop and by what you're trying to measure. Corn and soybean are the biggest, where we have dozens of breeding programs in multiple continents. I mean, we have breeding programs for corn in North America and in South America and in Asia. And so there are hundreds of locations where we grow corn, and I couldn't actually even tell you how many data points that comes to, but it's a lot every year. And then for other crops, we have much smaller programs. We have, for instance, we grow mustard in India. That's a very small program. We have alfalfa, which is grown as fodder for cattle to eat, and that's a very small program. Sunflower, which is grown for seed oil, we have that in maybe 2 locations, I think, in South Africa, and I'm blanking on the other place, but so it depends a lot by the crop. We might have hundreds and hundreds of locations that we grow every single season, or maybe it might just be like a dozen.
Now, are you in this data set just because as a hobby I'm growing my own mustard and I really enjoy it? Are you getting the species of mustard, their names in your data set, or are these all experiment 21A versus 21B?
Oh,
the
yeah.
Species names.
Oh, it would be great if we had fun names, but we generate tens of thousands of names.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of, that gets to the number of hybrids. If it's a hybrid crop like corn, or we grow, we end up producing thousands and thousands of hybrids that go through a selection process over several years.
Right. You're organizing data. You're not marketing the seed.
Right.
So I can't look in the Burpee catalog and be like, yeah, I need 21AB 2023.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, once they get commercialized, they get a certain kind of name, but even the commercial products have very coded. We do refer to commercial products by coded names. So unfortunately, I know there's not any really fun name or anything like that.
Sure.
And we don't tend to attach the names of specific breeders to the products that they produce, because we think of it as a team effort. So
that's nice.
The credit goes to more people more widely.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm looking at a bed of green wave outside of my window right now.
Well, that sounds successful.
The 2 beds in the backyard did better than the front yard, but that's okay. I'm still getting a yield. I'll still have some spicy mustard for the fall.
Delicious.
Yeah. So how did you get interested in science, Nick?
How did I get, well, and maybe I'll interpret that a bit more broadly about how did I get interested in statistics then. But
okay, sure.
So, way back when I finished college, my first job out of college was in the insurance industry, and I was working as an actuary. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of, that's kind of a job where you work with data. But, I only had a bachelor's degree. There's a lot of interesting problems in insurance. For example, if you're a big insurance company and you insure a lot of houses in Florida, for instance, you really have to be good at hurricane modeling and catastrophe modeling, and you have to be able to predict losses for those catastrophic events. And so I was really interested in getting into modeling, trying to make predictions or just using data to learn. And I think just kind of the place where I was working, and this is probably true more broadly, there are certain barriers to entry to doing certain kinds of work. And that doesn't mean you can't learn a lot of things on the job, but you do kind of have to have some kind of credential to get your foot in the door. And so for me, that was really going back to school and getting a graduate degree in statistics so that I could do that kind of work that just seemed more interesting to me. So that was kind of the path that I took. I went back to graduate school, and then I did some work in academia, and I ended up in the agriculture industry. And I guess if I would just say, if you're really interested in statistics, agriculture is kind of where it's at.
Really?
Agriculture is where statistics started.
Okay.
The kind of the oldest statistics, back to R.A. Fisher, Ronald Fisher, who kind of came up with a lot of the early statistics. It really all revolved around agriculture and field experiments and designing experiments and trying to farm better. And we're still doing that. And we've made a lot of progress, but it's in many ways, it's still on the cutting edge of applied statistics.
Well, just because of the field that I'm in and the field that you're in, do you think you would need any instrumentation to measure the pH, sulfur, or carbon content of your soil samples in your fields?
Oh my goodness. I mean, and I'm not the person to talk to about that stuff, but I have gotten quite a few nice tours. And even in the office building where I work, the first floor is all science labs.
Okay.
And I've gotten tours of those places, and they have lots of nice shiny equipment, I'll tell you that. And I don't know all about what it does,
yeah.
but there is a huge amount of chemistry going on there. Even on the side, that does more seed work, but especially on the crop protection side, where we employ a lot of analytical chemists and a lot of people who are trying to discover, novel compounds that have some, activity in terms of pesticide or herbicide or, those things that are relevant to agriculture. So there's a huge need for chemists and scientists, and also for laboratory equipment and lab experimentation. And we have we also have people who study insects. I guess you'd call them like entomologists.
Mhm.
We have insect labs where we breed insects.
Nice.
That is something that I never would have known that we did until I got a tour of our insect breeding facility. Because, one thing that we do is we produce plants that have, based on their genetics, they have some resistance to insects.
Sure.
And then one thing that we're interested in is how long is that inherited resistance going to last before the insects evolve to, eat them anyway. And so what we can do is we can breed insects, many generations of insects in an insect lab, and figure out how long is this product going to be viable for until the insects have evolved to not care about that kind of resistance and bypass that. And so we also have labs full of bugs.
That is disgusting and awesome.
It is. Yeah, it smells. It does not.
Really?
Right. Yeah, it's a funky.
Oh.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to work there, but
that's you're a statistician. If you're an entomologist, that might be a different story. That is so cool.
They love it. They love their bugs.
That's good. That's good. That is absolutely fascinating. So, do you get to do much direct cross-department communication, or are you guys kind of all on your own?
I think coordinating with people across the country or across the company is a huge challenge, but also something that's really fun and rewarding. So one of the things that I do, one of the things that's inside my responsibilities is supporting breeding programs in Asia Pacific. So I actually have a lot of communication with breeders and their teams in India and in the Philippines and in Indonesia, and in the future probably in China as well. So we are a global company. We have people all over the place, and so we do communicate with lots of different people on different teams. I also work a lot with people who are kind of doing the software end of it in terms of getting all of our data analysis in sort of automated pipelines of software programs. So it's working with a lot of different groups.
That's fantastic. Sounds like you're going to have Corteva send you a couple of field trips out to Southeast Asia.
Oh yeah, probably that's the kind of thing you ask for in the first quarter and not the third quarter of the year.
Right.
The later you get in the year, the less the company wants to spend money on that stuff. But
of course,
definitely in the future, I think that'll be on the horizon.
Nice. So, what are some of the main challenges in your field specifically?
Well, I think there's kind of some general challenges and some specific challenges. I think the biggest challenges are common to lots of companies of the size that we're at. Like I was talking about, coordinating across very large teams of people, many different areas of expertise, who are located all over the world, dealing with different time zones and people with different native languages, so that's a challenge. I think in agriculture, time is a big challenge because we are always working with the growing seasons of different crops and in different parts of the world, and the maturity times of those crops. And once the harvest is in, you got to make decisions and pick your best performing hybrids and inbred lines and move on. We've got to stay on the cutting edge of technology to stay competitive and to try to keep a competitive edge and advantage there. Also regulatory. So being a seed company, we are in the business of GMO, genetically modified organisms, and the kind of global regulatory environment around those types of products changes kind of all the time. There's a lot of public perception of that can be a challenge. Regulatory environments are influenced a lot by international politics, so that's a big challenge as well.
So, what are some specific challenges as a statistician for what you're doing?
Yeah, I think always trying to incorporate kind of the latest technology, like, for instance, drones. We've been using drones for a number of years now, but it's picked up a lot more recently as drone technology has gotten better, as the cameras are getting better, as sort of the range and battery life and controllability of drones gets better. So kind of what I'm talking about is when we grow crops in fields, we can have people go out in the fields and look at things and measure things with their hands and their eyes and write these things down. And another thing that we can do is we can have drones fly over fields and take pictures and then try to use those pictures to gain some information about yield or disease or all sorts of different traits about the plants growing in the fields. And the drone technology is, I think, going to be a huge advantage to us moving forward, because drones do have a cost, and they have some battery life and range, and they have some issues with cloud cover and things like that, but and weather. But
you guys are going way up there.
Oh, well, cloud cover. Well, that's also kind of like fog, and so something that happens over a lot of fields is you get evaporation.
Sure.
Yeah, you get like sweating coming off of crops,
and then you don't get a clear image.
Yeah, that can happen. So that's kind of what I'm talking about there. But
sure,
there are some different difficulties with drones, but ultimately, using drones, we can get a lot more data than with humans. There's costs associated with getting people out in fields to take measurements manually. Right. And so if we can fly a drone overhead, we can probably actually plant at more locations and get more data and take measurements multiple times. And that's going to change the way that we analyze the data for those types of experiments. Well, actually, so there's a few challenges there. One is changing the way we analyze the data. Another is actually taking those measurements from drones and figuring out how to make them useful, because it's one thing to have people go out and harvest a field of, say, cotton, and it's another to fly a drone over and take pictures and convert them to black and white and see, how many pixels are white and try to estimate the cotton yield from that. So there's that's kind of a machine learning problem.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, of taking image data and converting it into something that's going to correlate really highly with what would be human observed data. So that's a major challenge.
Do you have anybody looking at something along the lines of these new large language learning models or these large training data sets where you're taking the drone images and laying that over hand gathered data, so you have image sets that you could maybe train a machine learning application on?
We absolutely do that. Yeah.
Very cool.
Right. Yeah. We absolutely have been doing that for a number of years now of taking image data and comparing it with human observed data now. And that's that's something you got to be careful about too, because the human observed data, that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. when you're talking about, like a lot of times when you're talking about what you would call supervised learning in machine learning is you have some known data like predictions or labels or categories, and then you train a model to learn the categories of unlabeled data, right? So you can treat human observed yield or some other trait as the known label, but it's actually not the truth. It's just the human observed version of the truth.
Right.
So there are actually instances where drone data is higher quality. We've been able to show that for some things, drone data will be better than what a human would measure. For other things, it might be worse, or there could be some disagreement. And so those are challenges in terms of figuring out how to more efficiently observe things, but also still getting a high quality of data.
So would you say the statistics that you are analyzing is just helping the greater team and the company decide on which seeds to save and procreate, or what exactly is it that your statistic work is doing to help your company?
Yeah, I would say, we are helping to do two things really. We're designing the experiments. We're figuring out the best way to actually construct experiments to learn the most and account for as much variability as we can, so that we're not we're not confounding different variables. Like we're not planting all of one type of seed in one location and a different type of seed in a second location, and then type of seed is confounded with location, and you don't know if the difference is due to location or seed, right? So one thing that we can do is we can design, have the best design practices possible. And then the other thing that we can do is, once the experiments have been done, all of the hard work of actually implementing growing crops in fields and harvesting and collecting data, once that stuff is done, then we can analyze the data, which is basically taking a huge number of numbers and condensing them down into meaningful summaries that the scientists, the plant scientists, the breeders can then take and make decisions on. So just providing them with the most informative summaries of the data so that they can go ahead and make good choices.
Well, that's very nice. They trust all of you to design those important experiments.
Mm-hmm. Well, that trust is earned through close relationships, and that's like with the drone data. They didn't, people didn't just bring drones into the company and tell the breeders, hey, from now on we're going to start flying drones over your fields, and you're going to get drone data instead of human observed data. No, like we had to you have to work with the breeders, and they have to be part of that decision-making process, and everyone has to be on board that this is the right thing to do, and this is going to improve our understanding rather than take away from what we're trying to do. So it's an earned trust there.
So when it's planting season and you're between harvests and there's not a lot of data coming in, are you out there yoking the ox and pushing the plow?
Thankfully, no. I'm in the air conditioning and yeah. So right, yeah. There's definitely a seasonality to the workflows that happen. Planting and harvest are the most strenuous times. But in between planting and harvest, there's a lot of other data collection that happens. There are a lot of traits that are observed, that are measured while the plants are growing in the fields. So there's dozens of things that might be measured. Some of them are, like disease traits,
Yeah.
heights of plants, the way that they grow, the process of growth over time. Yeah.
So where are you guys? I mean, I know that it's observed or very easily observable. Are you guys pulling your weather data from a official third party, or do you have your own instruments sitting right there in the field?
Oh, for weather data. That's that's actually something I don't entirely know. I know that there are certain weather models that we use that rely on NOAA data.
They're one of the people that we work with, which is why I was curious.
Yeah, that is a big one. And some of that is used to evaluate the different locations where we plant and make comparisons or kind of categorize locations based on weather to try to kind of get like apples to apples comparisons in terms of weather. So that is something that is done. I don't think that we have weather stations, but that's something that I don't really know in terms of how I don't think that we do weather measurements. I mean, we will certainly do measurements on, if a field gets flooded, for instance. We can easily observe those kinds of things, or if there's drought, we can measure, I would say, extreme things like that. But as far as like daily weather, and like high wind events are a big deal because they knock over plants.
Sure. You could be checking for the robust nature of a soy or corn stalk.
Yeah, that's called root lodging or standability, whether or not corn falls over.
Now,
if corn falls over, you can't harvest corn if it falls over.
Nope. With root lodging, do you think that is impacted by the health of our soils?
Oh, yeah. So I, being someone who doesn't know a whole lot about plant growth, I don't know a lot about root lodging. I can tell you one really interesting thing that that may happen in the future is Corteva, as well as other companies. I know Bayer is doing this. Some companies are trying to make corn shorter. Yeah. So
no more knee high by July.
Well, it's usually actually a lot higher than that. But just trying to make the plants themselves actually shorter without making them a lot smaller. So keeping the ears big, keeping actually the leaves pretty big, but kind of making the stalk shorter, not skinnier, but just overall shorter. That's of course controlled by a lot of genetics, and it's a pretty challenging thing to do. But yeah, there is a lot of effort, because especially in sort of the Great Plains in the middle of the United States, wind and wind events cause a lot of damage and loss for corn. So that's something to keep an eye out for. Maybe in the next decade or so, you'll be driving by cornfields and you'll be wondering why they look so darn short.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were able to get small dogs pretty quick. Maybe we'll be able to get small corn pretty quick.
Could be.
More weather stuff, unrelated, and I'm sure fascinating to all of our listeners out there. Did you guys get those crazy flash floods yesterday?
Oh, no. Out in Iowa? No. Yeah. No, I don't. I mean, we really have had hardly any rain at all. So
we've been just getting, every time we get rain, we've been getting absolutely hammered.
Wow.
Yeah. But it's okay. Back to the interesting things. What would you say has been the most rewarding experience of your research career?
And it's kind of funny because I'm sort of the typical introverted kind of person in STEM, but I still think that the most rewarding experiences are teaching and mentoring younger people. So I worked in academia for 5 years before I transitioned to back to the private sector work. And I just think teaching college students, it's such an interesting part of their lives when they're making decisions about their future, and they're often very stressed about about making big decisions, and it's probably some of the first time that they're making some kind of large life decisions about what to study and what they're going to be when they grow up, and connecting with them about statistics and applied science, and just trying to spark interest in some of them here and there about doing this kind of work in their lives. And so that's always been the most rewarding thing for me. And so as I've moved into the private sector, I've lost some of that, but I've also still been able to teach, and as I think I get further along, I'll be able to mentor as well.
Wonderful.
Yeah, but I think something that's different between academia and private sector is the pace of the work. In private sector, there's always things to do, and they always had to be done yesterday. So there's very little time, or rather, it's very easy not to set aside time for documenting your work and creating a very good record. And often, I think companies struggle with having ways to train new hires and cross-train folks and produce teaching materials and that sort of thing. So my experience with teaching in academia has carried over in interesting ways, in that I've been someone who's really championed documenting work and producing really good documents of record of what we do, that can be used to teach other people and just be used as kind of a definition of what we do in our teams, especially in the biostatistics team, of just explaining to others, what our function is and how we do our jobs. So that's what I am really passionate about, that teaching element.
That's awesome. And it's so great to hear that that's carried over as well. What would you say has been the most challenging experience of your research career?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that as someone in academia and someone who's producing research products, publication is something that is important, but it can be a very challenging process. For people in academia, you need to publish. It's a metric by which your career is judged, and by which maybe your continued employment is contingent on. So it's quite important to publish. That's, I think, quite a bit different in the private sector, and maybe depends on where you work. Where I work now, publishing is not a requirement, but the publication process can be very long. Peer review can take a long time. I have peer reviewed many manuscripts. It's not easy to do a good job, and also there's not a lot of incentives to be a good peer reviewer. So the peer review process is just pretty tough. As someone who consumes research products, I think almost everyone goes straight to the preprint sites, the most common one being Archive. So I never really read journals. The only time I really read journals is for papers that are quite old. If I'm looking for something new and on the cutting edge, I'm finding it in the preprints. because by the time it gets published, it's probably like 3 or 4 years old. So that's a struggle. If you're in the publication game, it can be frustrating to deal with the time frame and reviewers who are not really the best sources of feedback. I think the best feedback I usually get about work is from peers who are working on similar things, who are looking to consume my work and then maybe apply it in what they're doing, and then I can have discussions with them about their perspective on things, because it's really the people who go and consume that research work who become most familiar with it, much more familiar than the reviewers often become. And so ultimately it becomes a system where I think, if you go and you present at conferences, or if you're just well connected with people in your field who are all kind of consuming each other's work and using it, that's a good system for getting the feedback, where the publication, peer reviewed publication is kind of lagging. So that's tough. I think, moving into the private sector, it's a much better relationship with journals, because our philosophy is we're going to publish something when we think that we have something really important to say that is going to be a public service. So we kind of view publication as as public service work, as what we can contribute to the public good, as long as we can do that without sacrificing a competitive advantage, in the business. So I think that's probably a better way of approaching publication than the position of most people in academia.
Have you found any specific challenges within the field of agriculture?
I mean, the scale of the work is a challenge, because I think we talked about this a little bit earlier. Growing, thousands of varieties of just one crop in hundreds of locations, year over year, it produces a huge amount of data that's and it takes a huge team of people to make those experiments happen. So I think the scale of it, the number of people involved across different geographies and countries, that's a huge challenge.
That's a lot of logistics coordinating.
Oh yeah.
Now, does that fall on you guys, the people designing the experiments, or who runs the logistics of that?
Oh, logistics people. So that's actually another tour that I've been on, was to see our warehouses, where we have basically where seed is prepared and sorted and packaged for shipment, which is largely internal. That's really used for seed that goes from our seed production facility to experimenters all over the world who are planting it in experimental field plots.
These experimenters, are they Corteva employees? Are they independent farmers who are getting paid as contractors? How do you know how that works?
Oh yeah. So the breeding programs are all, those are Corteva people. So we have our own land and facilities and research farms all over the world. Occasionally, even in Illinois, you might drive past one. It might, might say like a Pioneer research farm or research facility. Oftentimes they're pretty nondescript, so you might not even know what you're driving past. But they're all over the place. Got hundreds of them in the United States and all across the world where we have breeding programs. Now, there is also some experimentation that goes on with farmers who buy our seed.
Okay.
We have what we call like field agronomists who work with farmers who are our consumers. They're our customers. And I am not involved with those types of data sets or data collection or experiments. But we do have some types of experiments that go on with farmers. Now, what I would say about that is why we don't do more of that, or why that's not primarily what we do, is that if you're working with farmers, you have a lot less control, right? The farmer is in control of their farming practices. So different farmers do things quite a bit differently. And so when you're dealing with that data, that's data that you have so much less control over how it is produced.
Could you make the comparison of that being like in vitro versus in vivo, or like a lab environment versus a real world application though? Do you think that data would be useful?
Oh yeah, and that data is definitely useful, but yeah, that the difference there is what we would call controlled experiments. So our field experiments are largely what we would call randomized controlled trials, which is something you hear, that's something you probably hear associated with pharmaceutical industry, but that nomenclature really comes more from agriculture. It's we can control where the fields are, what we plant, when we plant, whether it's irrigated or not, how it's farmed, how it's managed. So we control a lot of things about that farming process, and randomization, where different plants are planted in the fields, all of that we can control. Whereas the data that we are getting from farmers is what we would call observational data. We can get observations from them. We have basically no control over how the data is generated.
Sure. So what are you most excited to be pursuing currently?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the drone data is one of the biggest things that's happening right now that's going to change a lot about our current practices. The more and more that we incorporate that kind of data, I would say most of the traits about plants that we measure now are only measured one time. Of course, with yield, that's measured at harvest, but there's a lot of other traits having to do with disease response or other traits of plants that could be measured many times. We could ideally we could fly drones really often and kind of record the entire growth cycle of individual plants. That could happen in some future state. We could actually get individual plant level data. And that's a point that I probably should have emphasized a long time ago in this conversation. When we're talking about field data, the data is really aggregated to what we call plots. So a plot has a certain dimension, and depending on the size of the plot and the crop and the planting density, it's going to have a different number of plants, approximate number of plants in it. But the data that we collect is not data from just one plant, but it's data from a bunch of plants that's aggregated together, and that's one data point. And so a field, even a really big field, might be, 50 by 80 plots, and each something like that. But that's actually, each one of those plots might be many plants. So it's not, and this is probably what people wouldn't really know about. We don't have plant level data on very many experiments. Plant level data would mean a human has to look at every single plant, right? And so we don't really do that. But that is something, the way technology is going, that could eventually happen, where actually the amount of data that we have explodes because of the ability to collect data in a much more automated fashion. And it's not just flying drones. There are drones that walk or roll through fields.
I was thinking of instead of a normal camera, you fly a drone with some LiDAR on there. Get all sorts of data at the time.
Yeah, that we already do that. Yeah, we have cameras that are not just the visible spectrum, but all sorts. We also have there's ground penetrating radar. There's all sorts of really cool stuff that I think is going to vastly increase the amount of data that we have. That's going to create a lot of opportunity for us to figure out how to extract usable information from that data. And then how do we have to change the statistical models that we use to accommodate all of that data? And even how do we have to change the, in the way down to the nitty gritty of the computer code, how do we write fast executable computer code to actually make all of these models happen, to process all of these models and data, and to do it fast? Because one of the things I mentioned before was, we get to harvest and we have to do it now. we have to generate all of these data summaries for the breeders so that they can make decisions in a timely fashion. And so we don't have time to waste. So yeah, those are just future things that are coming that we're going to be dealing with, and making, I think, huge improvements to agricultural science.
Too bad that the room temperature superconductor material didn't really work out. We would have had quantum computing ready for you guys next week.
We'd love to get some of those quantum computers, sure, but yeah, I don't think we can wait for that.
I don't think so either. You got what, maybe a month until stuff starts coming in?
Oh yeah, I think and for some of my rice experiments, we'll have mid-season traits in a few weeks.
There you go. Well, what advice would you give to young people who are interested in a career in science or statistics?
Wow. Yeah, I think one thing I would say is, and this is definitely something that I struggled with when I was maybe late high school and into college. I think young people tend to approach these decisions about what they're going to study with a sense of finality, like I'm going to pick this major that's biology, and then that means I'm going to do biology for the rest of my life. And I don't know if maybe I like chemistry more, so but if I pick biology, I won't get to do chemistry, right? So I think that young people put a huge amount of stock into these decisions, but I think what you find in practice is that people's career arcs can change a lot.
Yeah.
And people's careers can kind of become what they make out of them.
Yeah.
And, that doesn't mean that the degree they get doesn't make any difference at all. It certainly does, but I think the degree, it's a way of opening a door. But then once you go through the door, there's a lot of ways to proceed from there. And so, at Corteva, we have analytical chemists who become project managers. We have people in software development who go on to do, cybersecurity, or we have people in plant breeding who move into regulatory. So especially if you join a large organization, there's going to be a huge number of opportunities, and you'll find that what the first thing that you studied is not going to be 10 years into your career the most valuable thing that you know about. It's going to be all of the stuff you learned since you got there. And the relationships that you built and your industry knowledge and your company knowledge is going to be what makes you valuable, and people are going to probably want you to stick around. And so you can work with your your managers and find the right way for your career to move forward. So I guess what I would say to young people is definitely study what you're interested in, study what you're good at, study what you think that you will want to be doing for 5 years, but don't worry about what you're going to be doing in 10 or 15 years, and don't think that what you're committing to is the end all be all, because things are going to change.
Yeah, your entire industry could evaporate.
Well, hopefully positive change, but
well, that may not necessarily be a bad thing.
Yeah. Well, that's true too.
So, well, Dr. Nick, if people wanted to get in touch with you about your methods of documentation or your mindset that you pulled from academia into the public sector, or just want to drop a line and say thanks for a great, entertaining, and interesting podcast, where can they find you?
Oh, well, sure. I mean, you could email me at Nick, Syring, SYRING, at Corteva.com. Corteva is CORTEVA. But you can also look me up on LinkedIn. That's fine. If you want to learn more about Corteva, probably their Twitter feed, honestly, for as long as Twitter still remains viable,
Sure.
is a pretty decent place to go. Corteva is probably a company most people have never heard of. Part of that is because the merger is only about 5 years old. So it hasn't been around that long in its current form.
Sure.
But yeah, go ahead and follow Corteva.
Yeah, I'll give them a follow.
Yeah, look up some of the similar companies like Syngenta, BASF, UPL, Bayer Crop Science. They're all doing similar things, just not as good. So, but yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, I am going to have you go down to the bug lab and get me some chatty bug scientists, because I would love to talk to those folks.
I can definitely I will definitely point you in their direction, but I'm not gonna go back there. I'll just email them. I don't think I want to go back into that.
Oh, you'd sleep great. Creepy crawlies in your dreams.
Well, it really hits home when you go in there and the number of airlocks you walk through, because bugs are really good at getting places you don't want them to go if they get out. So yeah, so you really know you're in it when you've gone through like the 4th airlock.
Oh man, yeah, that would be. I would love to talk to those folks. And the plant scientists, the chemists, it sounds like you have a wonderful team of very interesting people over there.
Oh yeah. It's pretty cool when you go in, everybody's a PhD, that you definitely know that the place is in good hands. Yeah.
Great. All right, Nick. Well, thank you for your time and for this wonderful podcast.
Yeah, no problem, Blake. Thanks for having me.